Today we're going to do the second section. We're going to do 7.6, 7.7, 7.8, and 7.9. That will be our objective for today. Now we're going to talk about energy systems, ATP and CP reserves. During contraction, each cross bridge breaks down ATP to ADP and a phosphate group. ADP plus creatine phosphate equals ATP plus creatine. The enzyme creatine phosphokinase, or CPK, regulates this reaction. This energy system only lasts about 15 seconds. Next, we have the aerobic metabolism, or the aerobic energy system. This actually happens in the mitochondria of the cell. That's why we call the mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. It uses ADP, oxygen, phosphate ions, and organic substrates from carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins. The substrates, the carbs, lipids, or proteins, go through the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. The series of chemical reactions results in energy to make ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. Oxygen supply decides the ATP aerobic production. So this system is dependent upon oxygen, or O2. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Glycolysis breaks glucose down into pyruvate. With the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, we form about 34 ATP. With insufficient oxygen, pyruvate only yields 2 ATP. Pyruvate is converted to lactic acid, and that can potentially cause a pH problem in cells, muscle burning, and sometimes muscular soreness, and eventually the muscles will stop contracting. Muscle fatigue happens when there's a depletion of energy reserves or a lowering of pH. That's a test question. So when the energy reserves are depleted or the pH is too low, that means acidic. The muscle will no longer contract, even if stimulated. Endurance athletes use the aerobic metabolism, and they can draw on stored glycogen and lipids. Sprinters, on the other hand, are functioning anaerobically without oxygen. They deplete CP, or creatine phosphate, and ATP rapidly and build up lactic acid. During the recovery period, we increase our breathing, and this requires repaying the oxygen debt by continuing to breathe faster. Lactic acid is turned to carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is turned to carbon dioxide, and we increase our breathing rate to get rid of the carbon dioxide. Heat production also occurs during exercise. The blood vessels in the skin will dilate, the sweat covers the skin and evaporates. Muscular performance is measured in force and endurance. That's a test question. Force is the maximum amount of tension that can be produced by a muscle or muscle group. Endurance is the amount of time a particular activity can be performed. There are two keys to performance: the types of muscle fibers, or the types of fibers in the muscle. Are they fast twitch? Are they fast twitch oxidative glycolytic? Or are they slow twitch oxidative fibers? And the second key component is physical conditioning or training. So the two keys to performance are fiber types and physical training or conditioning. Muscle conditioning and performance. Physical conditioning and training can increase power and endurance. Anaerobic endurance is increased by brief, intense workouts. We call it HIIT, H-I-I-T. This causes a hypertrophy of the muscles. Aerobic endurance, on the other hand, is increased by sustained low levels of activity, like running or jogging, cycling, the 3-milers, swimming, long distance cycling, so on, like those examples. Now, cardiac muscle is found only in the heart and their cardiac muscle cells. Now, they have something called intercalated discs, which connect the cells to each other. They also communicate through gap junctions, allowing the fibers to work together. Cardiac muscle cells exhibit automaticity. They make up only 1% of the myocardium, that's the pacemaker cells, and they establish the rate of contraction. Now, the contractile cells are 99% of the myocardium. So 1% is the pacemaker cell, and then the cardiac contractile cells is the other 99%. They contract for longer periods than skeletal muscle fibers. They have unique sarcolemmas which make tetanus impossible. They are permeable to calcium and they rely on aerobic metabolism. Remember that at 4.5 weeks, the unborn's heart begins to beat and will beat until the day we die unless we have a cardiac episode. Next and finally is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found on the walls of most organs in the form of sheets, bundles, or sheaths. They lack myofibrils, sarcomeres, or striations. Smooth muscle cells are smaller than skeletal muscle fiber and have a single nucleus. Here are some images of cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. The three types of muscle are skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Now we're going to talk about skeletal muscle system names. They're based on three things. Action. Action is what they do. Origin. Origin is the end that stays stationary, and then insertion is the third thing, and that's the end that moves. So they're based on action, origin, and insertion. Actions are described as a relative to the bone that is moved, or described as the joint that is involved. So, in the first example, the bone that is moved, it would be flexion of the forearm. The bone that is moved is the forearm bones, which is the radius and ulna. The joint that is involved would be flexion at the elbow. The joint that is involved in that would be the elbow joint. Now, there are primary actions of muscles. The prime mover or the agonist is the muscle that is chiefly responsible for producing the movement. The antagonist is the muscle that opposes the other muscle. And the synergist is the muscle that helps the prime mover. Now, here's the example. At the flexion of the elbow, the biceps brachii is the prime mover, the triceps brachii is the antagonist, and the brachialis is the synergist. Now, during muscle terminology, it combines various terms, and anatomists will use to name the muscles. The muscles are organized into two groups. Axial muscles, they're mostly stabilizers, and appendicular muscles, which are stabilizers and movers of the limb.